In the winter of 1940, as Britain stood alone against the Axis, a quiet and unusual war effort began to take shape far from the front lines. On a stretch of farmland near Farnham in Surrey, soldiers and civilians gathered under canvas workshops filled with sawdust, glue, and rolls of brown paper. There were no rifles or shells in sight, only the soft hiss of paint sprayers and the rustle of cardboard sheeting. From this unlikely setting emerged one of the most ingenious weapons of the British home front, an army built from paper. The task had arisen from necessity. Britain's factories were already stretched to capacity, producing Spitfires, tanks, and ammunition. Steel and aluminium were precious, and every available ounce was reserved for the front. Yet as the Blitz intensified, British commanders realized that deception could become a form of defense in itself. If the enemy could be made to misjudge the location of airfields or the strength of armored forces, bombs might fall harmlessly on open fields rather than vital infrastructure. The first experiments were carried out under the newly established Camouflage Development and Training Centre, housed within the medieval walls of Farnham Castle. The unit brought together a remarkable collection of minds, artists, engineers, architects and stage designers, all volunteers drawn from the civilian world. Their directive was simple but challenging: to build convincing decoys from whatever material could be spared. Among their early successes were mock airfields constructed entirely from wood and paper. These sites, later known as Starfish decoys, were laid out to replicate operational bomber stations. From the air they appeared genuine, complete with illuminated runways and parked aircraft. In truth, the aircraft were hollow shells, made from canvas and cardboard stretched over wooden frames. When German bombers approached, concealed generators lit fires to imitate the glow of a burning airfield, drawing enemy attacks away from real installations. By early 1941, the War Office had authorized an entire network of such decoy sites across the United Kingdom. Each was positioned carefully to attract bombs that might otherwise strike cities or factories. Between January 1941 and May 1943, official records attribute more than 900 bombing sorties diverted to these false targets. The cost of a single decoy field rarely exceeded a few £100, a fraction of the expense of repairing a genuine airfield. As the project grew, a specialist branch of the Royal Engineers took over field operations. These men worked in secrecy, building dummy aircraft and vehicles that could deceive both Luftwaffe reconnaissance and German intelligence analysts. The designs were refined through repeated trial and error. When viewed from above, accuracy of shadow and proportion mattered more than material strength. A cardboard wing, properly angled, could suggest the presence of a full-sized bomber. By 1942, production of dummy aircraft had become a small industry. Teams of carpenters and paper craftsmen constructed hundreds of imitation Wellingtons, Lancasters and Spitfires. The materials were scavenged from packaging, warehouse scraps and theatre backdrops. Some were painted with tar to withstand the rain. Others used layers of varnished paper sealed with linseed oil. Even cockpit glass was mimicked, using cellophane coated with lamp black. From the air, the illusion was startlingly effective. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photos show neat rows of parked bombers at airfields that never existed. In one instance, a group of decoy Wellingtons positioned near Canterbury appeared so authentic that German bombers repeatedly targeted them for months. After the war, analysts concluded that entire squadrons of the Luftwaffe had been deceived into wasting munitions on paper and timber. Parallel to these airfield decoys, the British Army developed dummy tank formations, using wooden frames covered in painted canvas and strengthened with cardboard panels. Engineers could produce hundreds of mock vehicles at a fraction of the weight of real armor. These were arranged along roads, accompanied by artificial tracks and smokescreens to simulate troop movements. They became essential components in operational deception exercises designed to confuse enemy intelligence about Britain's readiness for invasion. One of the leading figures in these efforts was Colonel John Turner, a veteran engineer whose calm practicality helped coordinate the vast deception network. Turner's teams worked closely with theatre designer Geoffrey Barkas, whose experience in film production lent invaluable insight into perspective and visual composition. Barkas's crew experimented with color tones to ensure that paint on cardboard would match the hues of real vehicles when viewed through the hazy light of aerial photographs. The partnership between soldiers and artists produced results that exceeded expectations. In the late spring of 1943, tests were conducted in which British reconnaissance aircraft were tasked with identifying real and fake airfields. Pilots, unaware of which were genuine, misidentified the paper decoys in nearly half of cases. The success of this domestic experiment confirmed that the Luftwaffe would struggle even more when operating under combat conditions. Perhaps the most remarkable of the paper creations were the dummy gliders. As preparations began for potential airborne operations in Europe, British intelligence sought to convince German observers that a large fleet of Horsa and Hamilcar gliders was being assembled across the countryside. Engineers at Farnham devised light frameworks of wood and cardboard, covered in stretched fabric and painted to resemble metal skin. These were deployed on open fields, often in full view of passing reconnaissance flights. Each decoy glider weighed less than 200 pounds and could be erected by 4 men within hours. They were so lightweight that a strong gust could carry a wing section several yards. Yet once assembled and viewed from altitude, they appeared perfectly authentic. Reports later confirmed that German intelligence maps recorded over twice the number of operational gliders actually in existence in Britain during 1943. The men who built and maintained these decoys came from varied backgrounds, sign painters, carpenters, and set designers among them. Their work demanded patience rather than heroism, yet it was every bit as vital to the nation's defense. Many served in near anonymity, their projects classified, and their results measured only through aerial photographs. One corporal later recalled, "We fought with brushes and paper, but the bombs that missed London never knew the difference." Weather proved the most persistent adversary. Wind and rain could dismantle a week's construction overnight. To combat deterioration, the engineers adopted new coatings derived from aircraft dopes and marine varnish, which sealed the paper against moisture. Teams were dispatched daily to conduct repairs, ensuring the dummies maintained their realism. On foggy mornings, men could be seen lifting sagging wings and repainting camouflage patterns before the next reconnaissance flight passed overhead. Illusion also required supporting evidence. Dummy fuel drums, tire marks, and tents were added to create the appearance of activity. Vehicle tracks were carved into soft ground, while painted oil stains were used to simulate mechanical servicing. From the air, these subtle cues combined into a convincing narrative of military movement. German analysts, relying on black and white imagery, frequently misread these signs as proof of active units. Throughout 1943, the decoy network expanded rapidly. By year's end, over 400 dummy airfields and storage depots were scattered across Britain. These installations became known collectively as the Q sites, a term derived from their code designation. Each site was maintained by a small detachment of engineers and local Home Guard volunteers. Their mission was to ensure the dummies remained believable, even under scrutiny from experienced reconnaissance pilots. Evidence of their success came not only from intercepted intelligence, but also from the Luftwaffe's own behavior. Several raids in 1943 targeted fields where no active airfield existed, yet where decoy sites were known to operate. Investigations found unexploded ordnance among shredded paper and splintered wood, a silent testament to the effectiveness of the illusion. British intelligence calculated that these diversions saved hundreds of lives and thousands of tons of material. The deception extended beyond fixed sites. Mobile dummy vehicles were used to simulate convoys and armored concentrations preparing for coastal defense. Cardboard and canvas frames were mounted on light lorries, allowing rapid redeployment. When observed from above, these convoys gave the impression of continuous troop movement across southern England. This mobility proved essential during the months preceding the Normandy invasion, when misleading the enemy about Britain's true readiness became a strategic imperative. Although their work remained secret, the engineers received occasional acknowledgement from senior commanders. In a memorandum dated December 1943, the War Office commended the Camouflage Directorate for its exceptional contribution to the security of home defences through the application of practical illusion. The praise was measured, but within the unit it was taken as rare validation of their unorthodox craft. Training materials from this period reveal the scientific precision underpinning the art. Charts detailed how shadows altered under seasonal light and how paint pigments faded under prolonged sun exposure. Designers were instructed to study aerial photographs of real installations and duplicate the imperfections, uneven spacing, vehicle clutter, and tracks cutting at irregular angles. The goal was not perfection, but authenticity, an imitation so ordinary it escaped suspicion. One particularly innovative project involved the use of inflatable aircraft forms reinforced with paper strips. Developed jointly with the Meteorological Office, These inflatables were lighter than any wooden structure and could be deployed rapidly after raids. When filled with air, they adopted the contours of genuine fighters or bombers. Deployed on damaged airfields, they conveyed to German observers that operations had resumed immediately after attack, discouraging repeat strikes. The artists and engineers also turned their skills toward defensive camouflage for real equipment. Cardboard panels and paper netting were used to alter the appearance of radar stations, fuel depots, and anti-aircraft batteries. Even radar towers were disguised as barns or water tanks. Thus, the same material that built illusions also concealed reality. In both roles, paper served as a weapon of misdirection. As the war advanced into its final year, the value of deception remained high. In early 1945, with the threat of V-weapon attacks still present, new dummy facilities were erected to divert German targeting. Among these were imitation V-2 assembly buildings and fuel depots built from timber and heavy card. Though the Luftwaffe's reach had diminished, German reconnaissance continued intermittently, and the decoys ensured that scarce enemy resources were misapplied. After victory in Europe, the existence of these paper armies remained largely unknown to the public. The surviving records were filed under restricted classification and only gradually released in later decades. Many of the temporary structures had already vanished, their materials reused for peacetime repairs. Few photographs survived, and most participants returned quietly to civilian life. Yet their achievements had left an indelible mark on military science. Post-war evaluations concluded that the home front deception program diverted a significant proportion of enemy effort. The official estimate suggested that roughly 10% of all bombs dropped during the Blitz fell upon decoy targets. When measured against their minimal cost, the return on investment was extraordinary. What began as a desperate improvisation had matured into an organized branch of strategic warfare, influencing Allied deception across every later theater. In the years that followed, the techniques pioneered by the British Camouflage Service evolved into the study of visual deception within modern defense. The principle remained unchanged: control what the enemy believes to see. From radar reflectors to digital camouflage, every subsequent development owed something to the resourceful men and women who once shaped weapons from cardboard in the English rain. Today, scattered traces of the old decoy sites survive: faint earthworks, buried cables, or concrete control bunkers hidden under farmland. Local historians occasionally uncover fragments of painted paper or wooden spars, remnants of an era when imagination guarded the nation as surely as steel. These relics remind us that warfare is not solely a contest of arms, but also of perception. When viewed in retrospect, the British paper weapon symbolizes more than ingenuity under pressure. It demonstrates a national capacity for adaptation, turning scarcity into strength and creativity into protection. On those quiet fields amid glue pots and paint fumes, a small group of craftsmen transformed humble materials into instruments of deception, powerful enough to alter the course of air warfare. As the wind moves across the same English meadows, once dotted with cardboard gliders and wooden bombers, the legacy of their creators endures. Their contribution was measured not in battles won, but in attacks avoided and lives preserved. Through patience and precision, they proved that even in total war, the mind could outwit the machine. If you value these quiet moments of history, your support helps preserve them until our next account from the war years.